for being here so early, for giving me an excuse to get dressed up and to come out and to celebrate you. It has been an extraordinary season that we have been through. And I want to take this moment to acknowledge every single one of you who have given blood, sweat, and tears, who have sacrificed things that you won't even bother to tell anybody about, who you have stood in the face of extreme circumstances and you're still standing. You have been what I refer to as a Celtic term, anam caras. Anam cara, carer of the soul. You have been there when nobody else was there. And you are appreciated. You are honored for your perseverance, for your heart, and for your grit and determination. And so I want to take this moment to applaud each and every one of you. Deserve a lot more than applause. You deserve a standing ovation. You deserve a trip around the world, a year off. You deserve so much. And for the next 40 minutes or so, I want you to remember exactly who you are, who you have shown up to be in the face of circumstances that you never could have imagined. But you did it. There was no one else who was going to show up as a courageous leader, but you did. And you answered the call. And so, this morning, I'm going to talk to you about courageous leadership. I'm going to talk to you about gumbo and caregiving. And we're going to merge all of that together. And we are also going to have a bit of a discussion. So you're going to get to hear me talk to you for a while, and then I invite you to talk with me. It'll be a conversation. Is that okay? Alrighty, so that means we are going to have full participation, correct? And we dance together a little bit, so we've gotten to know each other, right? Awesome sauce. Okay, so I'm going to start by telling you my gumbo story. So not only is today National Gumbo Day, if my mother were alive, she would be 86 years old today. I discovered National Gumbo Day 6 years ago on the morning of the launch of my first book, Tears in My Gumbo, The Caregiver's Recipe for Resilience. That morning, I got up, much like this morning, really excited, really ready to go, and the phone rings, and it's a reporter. And he says, hi, I want to say congratulations on the launch of your book, but I just think it's brilliant that you're launching on National Gumbo Day. And I said, can you hold on just a moment, please? My publicist happened to be there, and I gave her the phone. And I said, today is National Gumbo Day. Who knew? Only my mother would play a trick like that, right? 4 months earlier, my publicist had insisted that I select a date. And I didn't know what date to select, so I just chose my mother's birthday. And in my mother's entire life, we never knew that she was born on National Gumbo Day. Or that it had been proclaimed National Gumbo Day on her birthday, because that would have been a whole nother reason to celebrate probably another month of her birthday. So my story has a lot to do with gumbo. I was born and raised in New Orleans. Gumbo is, it's the theme, the anthem. It is the analogy of my life. First of all, let me ask, how many of you, by show of hands, know what gumbo is or you've had gumbo? That's great, awesome sauce. Okay, now if you've had really, really good gumbo, then you know it is a dish that there's just nothing else like it. And you're going to have that experience, and you're going to want to experience it again. But good gumbo, really good gumbo, is not easy to find. But in New Orleans, It's very easy to find. Its origins is in New Orleans. So growing up, gumbo was used for every occasion. Happy occasions, sad occasions, no matter what was happening in life, every single milestone, gumbo was being served. It was the antidote if you were heartbroken. It was the antidote if you were grieving. And it just enhanced and took every other celebration to the next level. And so this amazing hodgepodge of ingredients, because that's what it is, it's a whole bunch of ingredients that under normal circumstances, you wouldn't necessarily put them together. But for gumbo, you chop, you cut, you slice, you peel, you dice, and you spend the entire day preparing this meal. In my family, it was a community affair. Everybody would come over, and we had different stations. Somehow, I always had the shrimp peeling station. And at that time, shrimp really was kind of stinky. And so, that's just the way it was. And so I would peel shrimp, and we also had the devine. You have to take the black lining out of the shrimp. So if you're eating shrimp with the black lining in, you're not eating the best quality of shrimp, okay? And so anyway, we did this. We did it in community, and we had an amazing time. It was laughter, it was bonding, it was just a great time. And my mother was always the orchestrator of this. For my entire life, whenever I prepared gumbo, I always had my mother on the phone with me. You guys remember when we had long distance charges? Long distance charges were crazy. 1 month, I had a $200 phone bill. And that was insane because I spent the entire time on the phone with my mom, walking me through making the gumbo. I became a caregiver to my mom, and mom's been gone 14 years now. And I became a caregiver to her close to 25 years ago, was when things really shifted and she needed me to move from daughter role to full-blown caregiver role. And I did so with a knowing. There was always a sense in my family that, number one, I was the oldest daughter, but I had such a bond with my mom that if anything ever happened to my mom and she needed me, I would be there. And so the gumbo experience was all throughout my life. Even when my mom was not well enough to make it herself, she prepared the gumbo. And it was not until my mother passed away, and the very first Christmas without my mom, I had the task of making gumbo. It was sort of like a rites of passage. I had been heavily grieving the loss of my mother. She was gone far too soon. My mother was my age when she was first diagnosed with a brain tumor, and she spent the last decade of her life, from 60 to 71, battling one thing after another, after another, after another. So the last 11 years of her life left a lot to be desired. And so when she passed, I had never written down the recipe. I had never thought to record her talking about the recipe. There is this place within us where we live in denial. And I was absolutely in denial around my mother's mortality. My mom wasn't going anywhere, despite the fact that we were going through all of the things that we were going through. So I never had the foresight to say, let me write this down. And so literally, it is Christmas season, and I have to make the gumbo because I've never had a Christmas without gumbo. I was now going to have Christmases moving forward without my mom. I had to have the gumbo without a recipe. So I did what you do. You call the people who know. My mom's sisters. None of them made gumbo as good as my mom. They didn't have her recipe. I talked to her mom, who at that time had some impairment around her memory, and she didn't quite remember, and she said, girl, just go for it. But I really didn't know how to go for it. And I did. I did everything I thought I was supposed to do. And gumbo is a very expensive dish too, by the way. To make a big pot of gumbo today, it would easily be $250. to put all of the ingredients, but it would be a very large pot that could easily serve 30 people. I don't know how to make a small pot of gumbo. And so I'm attempting to make this huge pot of gumbo, and I'm not doing so well. My husband's at work, I am grieving, I'm chopping onions, I'm crying, and I'm really beating myself up because how dumb could I be to not have this recipe? But I proceeded to do everything I thought. I knew all of the ingredients. I didn't really remember the process and the steps, but I went through it. I went to sleep, set the alarm. I actually tasted the gumbo before I went to sleep, and that was a devastating experience. The gumbo was terrible. So not only had I wasted a lot of money and a lot of ingredients, I had a terrible pot of gumbo. I put the pot on simmer, I went to sleep, I set an alarm, and in about an hour, I woke up to what I thought was a burning pot of gumbo. In my dreams, that's kind of what was happening, right? And I got up, and once I was really awake, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm smelling the aroma of my mom's gumbo. And I take the lid off of the pot, and it looks like my mom's gumbo. How is that possible? I just literally threw stuff together. How is this possible? The test, though, was taste. I'd already tasted it. It was terrible. And when I tasted that gumbo, tears of joy for the first time in 8 months rolled down my cheeks. And in that moment, I was informed that my first book would be Tears in My Gumbo. That's where the title came from. And it's Tears of Joy in My Gumbo. Because it really was a confirmation that those who leave us never really leave us. They always give us a part of themselves to carry on. And so for me, and for mine, it is my mother's gumbo. And so it is so apropos that I'm here today to share with you information, inspiration, and a few challenges around the concept that you know very well, courageous leadership in challenging times. And I think I've told you guys that gumbo is like the analogy of my life because it's a hot mess, right? It really is a hot mess. It's a lot that you're putting together. It's a lot of things that you're figuring out. And in leadership, especially in crisis, there are so many things that you don't know. There are so many things that you don't quite have confidence about, but you have a faith that somehow it's going to work out. Intuition shows up. You have a knowing within yourself that even if this isn't right, this may possibly get me a step closer to where I need to be. We've got some pretty amazing examples of courageous leadership right in this room. Rachel Robinson, where are you? Raise your hand. There's Rachel. Much like you, like each of you who had and overcome your challenges, Rachel owns a residential assisted living home in Fort Collins. And during the pandemic, she provided amazing leadership when her home had COVID issues. And I know many of you can relate to that. And Rachel rolled up her sleeves, and she showed up. It didn't matter the time. It didn't matter the circumstances. She was there. She was there when nobody else could be there. And she exemplified perseverance and determination, just like so many of you did. And it's almost like the pandemic was so extreme on so many levels that it really gave us an opportunity to, it introduced us to a side of ourselves that we may not have known. I know for me personally, initially, it introduced me to a side of myself that I wasn't particularly proud of. I didn't particularly like that person because that person was in resignation mode, defeatist mode, being fed by the media, a lot of negativity mode. And I had to make a decision, like many of you did. Either I'm going to roll up my sleeves and figure out a way to make a way out of what seems to be no way. For me, speaking and training had become 90% of my income. And so when the pandemic happened and all of the conferences were shut down, my entire livelihood went out the door. Yes, we did do virtual events, but virtual events don't really pay that well. And it's really hard because instead of looking out and talking to people like I need to talk to people, looking into people's eyes, I couldn't do that. Instead, they actually had it set up so I looked at myself because the virtual conferences were always recorded. So you literally had to present to yourself. And it was nerve-wracking. It was crazy. It was so wrong on so many levels. But of course, there was so much good that came out of the virtual experience and our ability to connect with people all over the country. TCG, immediately we set up caregiver support groups, something we had never done. We literally have caregivers from all across the country that participate every single week in our caregiver support group as a result of having access virtually. So that was a plus, but it was tough to get past all of the challenges and all of the obstacles that kept me from being able to do what I had been laying the foundation and laying the groundwork to do for some time. And there weren't a lot of options around increasing my income. I was still doing coaching, and so I was working with other business owners, who happened to be caregivers, who were challenged as well. And so when the PPP loans became available, that was always the question because so many people were financially strapped. And so it was, hey, why don't you go ahead on and apply? And I had one client in particular who was very reticent about not wanting to apply, but yet financially she was really strapped. And so before the deadline, she managed to get an application in and got the support that she needed because she was willing to ask for help. Leaders sometimes have a problem with asking for help. Is that the truth, or am I pulling straws? Leaders have a problem asking for help because we are so accustomed to providing the help. A leadership expert that I really like, Simon Sinek, he shares that courageous leadership really is not about being in charge, but it's actually about caring for those who are in your charge. You're caring for those who are in your charge. You're taking care of the people who are doing the job that needs to be done. And I thought that was really interesting because that, of course, if you're taking care of the people that are in your charge, you are in fact caregivers. How many of you acknowledge yourselves as such, as a caregiver? Okay, before we wrap this up, you'll have it figured out. Yes, indeed, you are indeed a caregiver. You are taking care of the people that are in your charge. You are likely responsible for somebody in your life who is aging, who needs support, someone in your life who has special needs, someone in your life who's challenged differently. And so you're a caregiver, and that is my bailiwick. Supporting caregivers across the board. TCG focuses on the family caregiver. as the pandemic has bloomed, we have shifted and we are also focusing on professional caregivers. And every single one of you fall into that category in some shape or fashion. And if you don't acknowledge that today, mark my word, in a few months you will. There's always an opportunity to take care. There is always an opportunity for someone in need who will knock on your door, who will ring your phone, and who will need support in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And Peter, I'm going to need you to give me the time signal. I just need to have an idea of where we are, because I can go on, and I want to make sure I cover all of the points that we need to cover this morning. And so our mission as an agency over the last 14 years has really been about making sure that caregivers outlive the people that they're taking care of. In my first 5 years of business, we lost 6 caregivers untimely. It was absolutely, positively untimely. And it was one of my greatest frustrations. It was the thing that made me want to quit. And it was also the thing that made me want to keep going. It really made me want to fight, to get people to listen, to make people listen and understand that self-care is not an option. It's mandatory. And so as I speak to you this morning and we talk about courageous leadership, the most important facet, and there are a lot of facets associated with effective and courageous leadership, but the most important facet that I want you to take into consideration is your self-care. Your self-care being non-negotiable. Your self-care being the #1 priority in your life. How many of you keep a color-coded calendar? Don't you love it for those of you that do? It's a color-coded calendar because it allows you to place a color on the things that are important on your calendar. My favorite color is red. It took me a while to figure out if I'm going to keep a color-coded calendar, then red ought to be the most prominent and dominant color on my calendar. So at a glance, when you look at your calendar and your color, meaning you, whatever it is that is specifically and exclusively you, your color should be on your calendar. And it should be dominant. And if it isn't, then we have some adjusting to do. On your table, you have colored index cards. And I am going to invite you to take one of those cards, that is your personal card, and I'm going to ask you to think about this. I want you to think about what is your non-negotiable self-care. What is non-negotiable? What will you not give up? What will you not skip? What will you not miss, regardless of what's going on? What is non-negotiable for you? I'm going to give you a few seconds on that one, because some of you really need to think about it. Okay. I see important takeaway that I want you to have from this session this morning is radical self-care. Radical self-care. What you guys have done in this industry, folks outside of the industry couldn't possibly comprehend. But what you have done and what we still need you to do is so important that radical self-care is what each of you must adopt in order to continue to show up as your best and highest self. And here's the thing about radical self-care. You can't hire anybody to do it for you. No matter how great your relationship is with your husband. Shout out to mine over there playing photographer this morning. He's a retired firefighter. And he used to get paid to work out. And I used to say, you get paid to work out. If I got paid to work out, I'd work out every day too. Well, the problem with that was he was certainly leading by example, but I wasn't following. Not the way that I needed to or that I should have. And it's not only been recently, since, what do they call it? The corona, there's a name for it that's disappeared. Just the COVID pounds, the extra COVID pounds. There's a name for it that won't come to me, but that got my attention. When I couldn't wear things that I used to be able to wear, that got my attention. And I thought, okay, if vanity is real, I needed to do certain things, right? So back to radical self-care for you. You get to decide for yourself what that is. And I want you to make a commitment to yourself this morning around what radical self-care is going to look like for you. I want to know who your tribe is going to be to support you in this effort, because if you really want to succeed, you need a support system. You need to identify who in your tribe is going to support you through the process so that you're able to be successful in your radical self-care, whatever that is. And some of you may already be on that path. I want to hear from you, especially for those of you who came to the conclusion, particularly during this season of crisis that we have all experienced. What was a catalyst for you? What helped shift you into a radical self-care and commitment and dedication? I have 7 people in my world who we lost to COVID. That's over less than a 2-year period. And most of those people should never have transitioned. But COVID got them and they're gone. That was certainly a catalyst to say, okay, how can I be as healthy as I possibly can be so that I can be as prepared as I can be to fight whatever I need to fight, right? And so that's a catalyst. But radical self-care, it's always great if you're in that mode. But if you're not in that mode, then shifting to get into that mode is necessary, it's ideal, and it's essential. It's essential to continue the work that you signed up to do. Radical self-care. So, is this a live mic peep? Testing. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll turn it on and see. There we go. So volunteers, don't everybody jump up at once. All right. Thank you.
Mine was mental health.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate your sharing, because mental health is such a factor for so many of us. We have been through something that none of us was prepared for. Coping skills and the support to get through it from my caregivers, most of it was isolation. And not being able to get support outside of our support group, right? Not being able to get out of the house. it's a catalyst. It's absolutely a catalyst. Anybody else over here? Okay, I'll stroll on over. I know this side of the room wants to outdo this side of the room, so come on. One more person, come on. What is it? I see you over there.
Just for me, the last couple of years, it's been time with family. That's, I just, through what's occurred in our world, in our industry, and caring for others, that's just been huge for me.
Thank you. And isn't that interesting? Because for me, family time was not the priority that it should have been until we realized we couldn't get together as a family. You know, certain things we take for granted, right? And that was certainly one of them. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, over here. Okay, we'll start here.
Commitment to pray to God.
Woo! Oh, that's a good one. Okay, did it bring you to your knees, right? I remember listening to someone saying, if you don't know Jesus, then find something close to Jesus. Because you need something bigger than yourself to get through this. Tapping into your higher source. And we'll talk about that in a moment.
Mine is bi-monthly massages, taking the time for me.
All right.
Nothing else.
I love that. Oh, yes. Okay.
Mine would be the same as hers. Mine was my faith, my spirituality, my connection with church, and the family that I have from my church. That was for mine.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Anyone else over here?
I know when I was going through the hardest time that she just spoke about, when I was going through COVID, books. That was just a mental release for me, was just to get into a book and just not think about anything else. So.
Funny you should mention books. So, Prayers in My Gumbo was born out of the COVID experience. One of my last speaking engagements before the lockdown was the Alzheimer's Association. I was their keynote for their national conference, and I spoke a lot about faith. And of all of the glowing comments and remarks after the conference, there was one remark that stuck with me. Right? You could have 100 positive remarks, and it's that one negative remark. And this was an Alzheimer's conference. Someone took offense to my speaking about God, about spirituality. And I immediately prayed for that person because there is no way under the sun you're going to get through this journey of caring for someone with Alzheimer's or dementia and not have a spiritual practice to tap into. And so that comment and what I was going through with my own mental health around the isolation, around loss of income, it brought me to my knees. And immediately, Prayers in My Gumbo was born. And I felt like if I got so much solace from sharing my prayers, my thoughts, my meditations, and just the stories around my faith and my questioning of faith during the pandemic, then surely other caregivers could benefit with sharing as well. And so inside of a couple of months, we had 40 caregivers from around the country offer contributions to Prayers in My Gumbo. And so by September, we had Prayers in My Gumbo hot off the press, ready to go. And it has been the inspirational handbook for caregivers and an inspirational handbook for those who are supporting caregivers. And thank you. And Tears in My Gumbo was the manual, the how-to. It was a collection of stories. It is a collection of stories around the nuts and bolts of caregiving. What you need to know, the 5 steps of conscious caregiving, etc. And so the pandemic bore Prayers in My Gumbo, and now we're working on Recipes in My Gumbo. And it's a slow process because recipes have come in. We're collaborating with Chef Lisa Givens of Gourmet Away. She was the 2018 Personal Chef of the Year. And she lives in Colorado, and she just happens to be from New Orleans, and one of my dearest friends. And so we are collaborating on that effort, and boy, we are working through the recipes that are coming through. If you're from New Orleans, your palate is difficult, it's challenging, right? So another thing that happens during the course of crisis, oftentimes we take the focus off of ourselves and we put it on something else. We look at what's needed. And for me, 3 years ago, I looked at the fact that, wow, they're talking about professional caregivers a lot, and there's a lot of attention on professional caregivers. There's not much happening around family caregivers. And of course, that's my playground, and I was really concerned about that. And so instead of focusing on myself, I decided that it would be a good time during the midst of a pandemic to launch a campaign, 10 random acts of kindness, 10,000 books to caregivers in 30 days. That was really ludicrous. But it kind of worked. People were really interested in supporting the idea of a campaign around family caregivers. We literally pulled it together in 2 months, and we just kind of made it happen. And we had the first sponsor, Five Wellbeing Spa out of Littleton. And yes, this is a plug for them, because they have supported family caregivers for the last 5 years. When the spa was open, they were able to bring caregivers in throughout the month of November to pamper and just take care of caregivers. And so once things shut down, they actually developed a concept called virtual facials. And we literally did virtual facial parties with caregivers all throughout the month of November, with thanks to Five Wellbeing Spa. And then we got other companies and organizations on board to just do the same. So for those of you who say that taking care of yourself is high priority, then you can actually take care of yourself and take care of your team with virtual facials. And it's a cool concept, and it's a part of the 10-10-30 campaign. So fast forward to last year, we tried to do it again, and people were kind of burnt out. They weren't really interested in supporting the effort so much, so we did a streamlined version. And this year we thought we'd take a break until our caregivers let us know that they didn't appreciate us taking a break. And so we're continuing, still a streamlined process, and we're working and growing and really wanting to create momentum around this particular campaign. But again, that was the distraction that I created for myself so that I wouldn't have to focus on myself. I mentioned the PPP earlier. I had another caregiver, again, was a client, coaching client, who was really fixated on the financial piece and had qualified for the PPP loan, and that helped, but still, underwater and still needing support. And so then we learned about it's called the ERC. You guys heard about the ERC? Employee Retention Credit. If you initially it was thought that if you qualified for the PPP, you couldn't qualify for the ERC, but you can. So if you've got 5 employees that were W-2 between 2019 and 2020, you qualify for those resources. It makes sense to tap into the resources that can support you, that can support your business. It makes sense to ask questions and to also share resources around resources, share information around the resources that are available. So the other thing that happened was technology, right? There's all kinds of technology out there. And so year 1, we had Beamer come on board. Beamer, you guys have heard about the electronic mat. You lay on it for 8 minutes, magnetic energy regulator. And so Beamer came on board, and they were a small sponsor. And last year they said, hey, we're really wanting to help people feel better, help people rest, sleep well, and overcome some of the maladies that they're experiencing. And they said, why don't you just try it for a few days? And a few days turned into 30 days. And after 30 days, I didn't want to give it back. And so I identifying and finding technology that is supportive of helping you to live your best life is essential. So back to that card. What is non-negotiable for you? What is radical self-care? And who in your circle is going to support you in that effort? If you say, I have nobody, you got me. I'm a coach. I do that every day. Identify someone that can hold you accountable. 2 weeks ago, our fiscal sponsor, her name is Mary Nicholson, Healing's Emotion is a fiscal sponsor for our caregivers campaign. And she's turning 65, and she wanted to walk 65,000 steps in 2 weeks. And I thought, good luck with that. Good luck with that. But coincidentally, I joined a support group around maintaining health and vitality. And literally, this small support group of 8 women began encouraging us. Just last week, we started last Monday. And we began walking doing 10,000 steps a day. And before I knew it, I had hit 65,000 steps because I had a support group encouraging me. And when you're a part of a team, and the team is doing 8,000 steps, well, you got to show up and do 8,000 steps as well. That encouragement, that support, was the catalyst for me being able to celebrate with my friend her 65 years with 65,000 steps. And I really didn't believe I could do it. So that's what the season has been about, doing things that we didn't believe we could do. Showing up when we didn't want to show up, showing up because nobody else was going to show up if we didn't. Persevering, persisting, pushing through, but remembering that the foundation of everything that we do, the foundation of it all must be spiritually based. And whatever that is for you, whatever that is, tapping into your higher source and remembering that through your source, through God for me, and for many people in this room, I can do all things. But without it, I'm a hot mess, just like that bowl of gumbo. I thank you. I want to share with you that because it is National Gumbo Day, we absolutely have the set of books, Tears of My Gumbo and Prayers of My Gumbo, on special today for you at a cost of $30. Feel free to join us at the table. If you'd like to have a signed copy, there's a sticky note that you can just put your the name that you want the book signed to, and we'll get that taken care of. And with that said, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for every moment, for every sacrifice, for every challenge that you have overcome, that you're still working through and pushing through, even though you don't hear it often enough. We appreciate